spoken slowly, deliberately, like a man who has learned that silence is more powerful than noise. I have walked into rooms where grown men forgot how to breathe. I have ended business arrangements that took other people decades to build. I have made decisions at 2 in the morning that entire governments spent years trying to understand. But the night my world collapsed, the night I saw what I was never supposed to see, I did not call my most feared lieutenant. I did not reach for my phone. I did not say a single word to the woman who had been standing beside me at every public event for 3 years. I walked into my own kitchen. I sat down in the dark. And I told the truth to the only person in that entire penthouse who had been holding it long before I arrived. She was wearing a white apron. She was 26 years old. She was the maid. And she already knew. The question that kept me awake that night, and every night after, was not why my wife did what she did. It was not how long it had been happening. It was not even what it was going to cost them when I was ready to respond. The question was simpler than all of that. How did the maid know before I did? What had she seen? What had she heard? And why, with everything she knew, did she choose to wait? Packing shifts slightly, still controlled, but now moving toward the story promise. My name is Ree Ji. I am 32 years old. And I run an organization that 3 separate governments have investigated, surveilled, and attempted to dismantle over the past 9 years. They have not succeeded. I tell you this not to impress you. I tell you this so you understand the particular irony of what I am about to share. Because the thing that nearly destroyed me was not a government. It was not a rival. It was not a debt or a war or a decision made in a back room somewhere that I should have seen coming. It was a marriage. And inside that marriage, behind the marble floors and the designer furniture, and the life that looked from the outside like everything a man could want, something was being built in the dark that I was never meant to survive. I was going to tell you it started with my wife. But that is not quite true. It started with a man named Jung. It started with an offer Jade could not refuse. And it started with a young woman named Rosie who came to work in my home with a mop and a uniform and no idea what she was walking into, and who saw more clearly than anyone around her what was actually happening. Today I am going to take you through exactly what unfolded, how the affair began, what it was really covering, what Rosie heard in the rooms where people forgot she was present, why she carried that knowledge alone for as long as she did, and what happened the night I finally came home early. This is not a story about a cheating wife. This is a story about who you trust when trust is the most dangerous thing you own, and about the woman in the simplest uniform in the room who turned out to be the only person telling the truth. There is a particular kind of power that stops making noise after a while. In the beginning, it is loud. It announces itself in the way men move around you, in the way conversations change register the moment you enter a room, in the way people smile at you with their mouths while their eyes are doing something else entirely. You notice it. You use it. You build more of it because more feels like safety, and safety is the only thing a man in my position is genuinely chasing underneath everything else. But after enough years, the power goes quiet. It becomes the silence itself, the empty chair at a meeting that nobody sits in unless invited, the phone call that gets answered on the first ring at 3 in the morning, the name that ends arguments in rooms I have never entered and will never need to. You stop feeling it as something outside yourself. It becomes the air you move through, the temperature of every room you walk into, the particular stillness that falls over people when they understand, not from anything you have said but from something much older and harder to name, that the man standing in front of them has already calculated every version of this conversation and is comfortable with all of them. I built that over 11 years. Started with nothing that would look impressive to anyone watching from the outside. A set of decisions, a willingness to stay in rooms that other people found too uncomfortable to remain in, a memory for detail that turned out to be more valuable than any weapon. You learn quickly in this world that the most dangerous thing you can give another person is the knowledge that you were not listening, because it means every word they spoke in what they thought was privacy is now yours to keep. By 32, I controlled more of this city than the people elected to run it. I had the penthouse on the 47th floor with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the city spread below like something I had personally arranged. Marble floors, furniture that cost more than most people make in a year, art on the walls that I did not choose and did not particularly understand, but that told the right story to the right people when they visited. A kitchen that was stocked every morning by staff who arrived before I woke and left before I came home. A life that from the outside looked like everything. From the inside it was a very large, very quiet, very expensive place to be completely alone. I want to be precise about this because it matters to the rest of what I am going to tell you. The loneliness was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It did not arrive one morning as a feeling I could identify and address. It was structural. It was built into the architecture of the thing I had constructed. When every person around you either fears you or needs something from you, the emotional vocabulary of the room becomes very limited very quickly. People tell you what they think you want to hear. They laugh at the right moments. They agree before you have finished the sentence. And after enough years of that, you stop expecting anything different. You stop reaching for it. You build the walls higher not because you want to keep people out, but because you have simply forgotten what it felt like when someone came in. That was the world I came home to every night. That was the world Jade entered when she married me. And that was the world Rosie walked into with a mop and a uniform, and eyes that saw everything. I met Jade at a charity event I had no genuine interest in attending. Someone in my circle had decided that visibility at certain social functions was useful for the organization's public architecture, the carefully maintained fiction that the people behind the hand group were businessmen first and everything else not at all. So I attended. I wore the right suit. I said the appropriate things to the appropriate people. And somewhere between the third conversation I did not care about, and the fourth glass of water I was holding purely to have something to do with my hands, I saw her across the room. She was beautiful in the specific way that made every other person in her vicinity slightly less visible. That is not a poetic observation. It is a factual one. There is a category of beauty that does not simply exist. It reorganizes the space around itself. Jade had that. Dark hair, precise features, the kind of posture that suggested she had spent years being looked at and had made a private decision to be worth it. I am telling you what I saw, not what was true. What I felt in that moment, and I want to be honest about this because the dishonesty of this particular feeling is part of what cost me, was not simply attraction. It was recognition of something I had stopped believing I would find. She looked warm. She looked like someone who laughed easily and meant it. She looked like the thing I had been building the empire to earn and had slowly stopped admitting I still wanted. I approached her. We spoke for 20 minutes. I asked to see her again, and she said yes with a smile that I spent longer than I should admit thinking about afterward. We were married 14 months later. I want to tell you I saw the signs, that somewhere in those 14 months there were moments that should have given me pause, but the honest answer is that I was not looking. I had spent 11 years seeing through everyone, reading rooms, identifying the thing behind the thing. And then I met someone I wanted to believe in, and I put down every instrument I had ever used to stay safe, and I simply believed. That was my mistake, not trusting her, choosing to stop looking. What Jade saw when she looked at me was something I did not understand until much later. Not a man she wanted to build a life with, not even a man she disliked. Something more impersonal than either of those things. She saw architecture. She saw a structure that could support a life she wanted to live, a life of visibility, of luxury, of being seen by the right people in the right rooms. She was not cruel about it. I do not think she sat in a room somewhere and made a cold calculation. I think she looked at me and saw possibility, and told herself that possibility was close enough to love to work with. The marriage was a transaction from the first day. Only one of us knew it. I came home every night to the marble floors and the city view, and a woman who performed warmth with genuine skill, and I told myself that what I had built outside those walls had finally purchased something real inside them. I was wrong, but I did not know that yet. What I knew was that I had a wife who looked like the answer to a question I had stopped asking out loud, and a maid who arrived 6 months into the marriage and never once stopped watching. Rosie arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, carrying a single bag and a reference letter from an agency that specialized in placing domestic staff in high-end residential properties across the city. She was 25 years old. She had grown up in Atlanta, the second of 4 children, in a household where money was something you thought about every day without ever quite having enough of it. She had come to this city 2 years earlier following a plan that had not entirely worked out the way she intended. A hospitality management program, a part-time job that became a full-time job, and then the gradual practical understanding that the fastest path to stability in a city like this was not the plan she had arrived with, but the one the city was actually offering. She did not know what I was when she walked through that door. The agency had told her I was a private businessman, high net worth, demanding but fair. The penthouse required daily maintenance, discretion was essential, and the compensation was considerably above market rate, which in her experience meant either the work was genuinely difficult or the household was genuinely complicated, or both. It was both, but not for the reasons she expected. She learned what I actually was in pieces. A conversation she was not meant to hear in the first week. A visitor in the third week whose name she recognized from something she had read once and filed away. The way certain men moved when they came to the apartment, not like guests, but like people who had spent years learning to take up only the space they were assigned. By the end of the first month, she understood enough to know that the reference letter description of private businessman was doing a significant amount of work. She did not leave. I have thought about this many times since. She was 25 years old and she had walked into a situation that most people, most reasonable people with options, would have walked back out of without much deliberation. But Rosie was not operating on options. She was operating on the particular pragmatism of someone who has learned that the world is complicated everywhere, and that complicated with good compensation is still preferable to simple with none. So she stayed. She learned the rhythms of the household. She became, and this is the only word that fits, invisible. Not because anyone made her invisible, because she had spent enough of her life in rooms where she was the least powerful person present that invisibility had become a fluency. She knew how to move through a space without disrupting it. She knew how to be present without registering as present. She knew, and this was the specific intelligence that changed everything, that people in power do not lower their voices for the staff. They lower their voices for other powerful people. For everyone else they simply speak, because everyone else is furniture, because the woman clearing the table or moving through the hallway or replacing the flowers by the window is not a person processing information in that moment. She is part of the room's operating system. Background, ambient, not worth the adjustment. Rosie understood this perfectly. And so she listened. Not deliberately at first, simply by being present while other people forgot she was. A sentence here, a name there, a tone of voice that contradicted the words being spoken. The slow accumulation of detail that does not look like a picture until you have enough pieces and then suddenly you cannot see anything else. By the time Jung first appeared at the penthouse, Rosie had been quietly building a map of everything for 4 months. She was ready, even if she did not know yet what she was going to do with it. He came to the penthouse for the first time on a Thursday evening in April. I was not there. I was in a meeting that ran long and then another meeting that was called because the first one had not resolved what it was supposed to resolve. This was not unusual. There were weeks where the apartment functioned more as a place I slept than a place I lived, and Jade had learned to fill that space with her own arrangements, lunches, social visits, the slow, careful cultivation of a social life that existed mostly in the hours I was absent. Jung arrived as part of a small group, 4 people. Jade had described it to me afterward as a networking dinner. Drinks first, then reservations somewhere downtown. Casual, unmemorable, the kind of evening that leaves no particular impression. Rosie served the drinks. She told me later that she noticed him immediately, not because he was the most striking person in the room, though he was objectively that, but because of the specific way he arranged his attention. Most people at gatherings like that distribute their attention socially. They move it around the room. They manage multiple conversations. Jung did none of that. His attention that evening was entirely on Jade. Not obviously. Not in a way that anyone watching casually would have identified as anything other than engaged conversation. But Rosie was not watching casually, and she noticed that, for the entire time she was moving through that room, his eyes returned to Jade with the consistency of someone who had arrived with a purpose and was executing it. He was 30 years old, the only son of the founder of Jung Industries, the cosmetics conglomerate whose products occupied more shelf space across Asia than any competitor by a margin that was not close. His face was on the cover of 2 business magazines. He wore his wealth the way certain people do, not loudly but structurally, in the quality of every small detail, so that you felt it before you consciously registered it. He was charming in the specific way that intelligent people are charming, meaning he listened well enough to make you feel briefly like the most interesting person he had encountered in some time. He told Jade that evening that she had a presence that photographed beautifully, that he had been developing a new campaign for the international expansion of Jung Industries' premium line, that he had been looking for a face that carried both elegance and something less definable, something real, that he thought she might be exactly what the campaign required. Rosie was refilling glasses when he said it. She watched Jade's face in the moment the offer landed, the particular quality of the stillness that moved across it, the practiced composure of a woman receiving something she had wanted for a very long time and was carefully not showing how much. The modeling world had circled Jade before. Smaller offers, less credible platforms. She had mentioned them to me once and I had not responded in the way she hoped, and the subject had not come up again. This was not a small offer. Jung Industries was not a less credible platform. Rosie said nothing, cleared the glasses, moved back to the kitchen. But she stood at the counter for a moment longer than the task required. Because something about the way Jung had delivered the offer, the timing of it, the precision, the way his eyes had moved once briefly to the window, and the city below as if confirming a coordinate, had settled in her chest as something that was not quite what it was presenting itself as. She could not name it yet. But she did not let it go. The first time she heard something she was not supposed to hear, she was changing the flowers in the hallway outside the living room. Jade had not closed the door fully. She rarely did when she was alone in the apartment. It was one of the habits that revealed the gap between the performance Jade gave when I was present and the person she actually was when she believed no one was watching. Around me she was composed, deliberate, always slightly edited. Alone she was careless, doors left open, conversations conducted at full volume. The particular looseness of a woman who had learned to be one thing in public and had not yet understood that the domestic staff does not count as private. Rosie heard Jung's voice through the gap. Not all of it enough. He was asking about my Tuesday routine. Not casually, not in the way someone asks a question to fill silence or out of passing curiosity. He was asking with the specific patience of someone who already knew the answer existed and was simply waiting for it to be confirmed. Jade gave it. The time I left in the morning. The route the car typically took. Whether the driver changed on Tuesdays or stayed consistent. Rosie set down the flowers and stood completely still in the hallway. She told me later that the feeling was not dramatic. It was not a sudden cold fear or a sharp moment of clarity. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a pattern completing itself, like watching the last piece of something slide into position and understanding for the first time what the picture actually was. She picked up the flowers and kept moving. Over the following 3 weeks she paid a different quality of attention. Not to the affair, she had understood the shape of that weeks earlier and had filed it in the category of things that were not her business to address. What she was paying attention to now was the other thing. The thing underneath the affair. The questions that kept returning in different forms across different conversations. My schedule. My security arrangements. The names of the 2 men who traveled with me on certain evenings, and whether they were always the same 2 men or whether they rotated. Jade answered all of it. She answered it in the easy, unguarded way of a woman who believed she was sharing small details with a man who was interested in her life, who did not understand, and this is the part that Rosie sat with for a long time, that she was not being asked because Jung was curious. She was being asked because she was useful. She was a key, and keys do not need to understand the door they are opening. Rosie understood before Jade did. She understood it on a Wednesday afternoon when she was wiping down the kitchen counter and heard Jung on the phone in the guest bathroom, door not fully closed, voice not fully lowered, speaking to someone she did not know in a language that was not English. She did not understand every word. She understood enough. She understood the name that came up twice. She understood the tone that surrounded it. She understood that what she was listening to was not a man conducting an affair. It was a man conducting a timeline. She finished wiping down the counter. She rinsed the cloth. She folded it over the edge of the sink, exactly as she always did. And she began, quietly, methodically, with the particular focus of someone who has just understood that a situation has moved from complicated to dangerous, to decide what she was going to do with everything she knew. There is a thing that happens when you carry knowledge that does not belong to you. It does not sit still. It moves around inside you, sometimes quiet for days at a time, and then suddenly present again at the worst possible moment, when your hands are busy with something ordinary, and your mind is briefly unguarded, and the full weight of what you know lands on you without warning in the middle of an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. Rosie carried it for 11 weeks. She knew about Jung and Jade by the end of the 4th week, not as a suspicion, not as a feeling, as a fact assembled from specific pieces of evidence that she had not gone looking for but had not been able to avoid. The phone calls that Jade took in the east hallway when she believed the apartment was empty, not knowing that Rosie was in the laundry room 2 doors down with the door ajar. The visitor who came twice when Ree Ji was traveling and left each time before the building's evening security rotation. The conversation she overheard in the kitchen between Jade and a friend, in which Jade said something she immediately laughed off, but that Rosie heard underneath the laugh rather than on top of it. By the 5th week she knew it was not simply an affair. That was the part that changed everything. That was the piece of information that transformed a private moral burden into something with real and immediate stakes. Because an affair is a personal tragedy. An affair is between the people involved, and the damage is emotional, and the timeline is uncertain, and the outcome is survivable. What Jung was building was not an affair. It was a mechanism. Rosie understood this with the particular clarity of someone who had been underestimated their entire life, which meant she had spent their entire life watching what people actually did rather than what they said they were doing. Jung's questions to Jade were not the questions of a man conducting a love affair. They were operational. Specific. The kind of specific that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with access. He wanted schedules, entry points. The names of the two men who traveled with Ree Ji on evenings, when the formal security team was stood down. He was building something, and Jade, whether she understood it fully or not, was handing him the materials. Rosie made the decision to stay silent on a Wednesday evening while she was folding laundry in the service room at the back of the penthouse. She did not make it easily. She turned it over for a long time, the way you turn over something with weight before you commit to carrying it, and she examined every version of what speaking early would produce. If she told Ree Ji that week, he would move immediately. A man like Ree Ji did not receive information and then wait. He responded, and if he responded before she had assembled enough to show him the full shape of it, before she could demonstrate not just the affair but the architecture beneath the affair, then Jung would know the plan had surfaced and adjust it, or accelerate it, or disappear and return in a form nobody recognized. Speaking too early was not caution. It was the fastest way to ensure the danger found a way around her. So she waited. She set the folded shirt down and she went back to work, and she carried what she knew through 11 weeks of ordinary mornings, making coffee, replacing towels, moving through rooms where the most dangerous conversation in the city was happening, and she said nothing. Not because she was afraid. Because she was the only one in that penthouse who was thinking clearly enough to understand that the right moment had not arrived yet. She was going to make sure it did. The meeting ended 40 minutes ahead of schedule. This was unusual. The kind of meeting it was did not typically end early. It ran until everything had been said that needed saying, and sometimes beyond that, because the men in that room had learned over years that the conversation after the official conversation was often the one that actually mattered. But that night something shifted in the room's temperature around the 2-hour mark, and everyone felt it simultaneously, and by unspoken agreement we were done. My driver pulled up outside the building at 9:47. I remember the time because I looked at my phone in the elevator and registered it without particular interest. An ordinary detail from an ordinary ending to an ordinary evening. The last ordinary moment I would have for a long time. The penthouse was not dark when I opened the door. The main lights were off, but the hallway that led toward the east wing was lit from further inside. The warm amber glow of the bedroom corridor lamps that Jade preferred in the evenings. I set my keys on the table by the entrance the way I always did. I loosened my collar. I moved through the apartment with the automatic ease of a man navigating a space he has occupied long enough that his body knows it without his mind having to pay attention. I was almost at the corridor when I heard a voice. Not Jade's voice. A voice I recognized from the 3 occasions Jung had visited the apartment. Charming occasions. Social occasions. The son of a significant business family in town for various reasons, cultural, professional, the ordinary overlap of circles that happen at a certain level of the city's social architecture. A man I had assessed briefly and filed under irrelevant. I stopped moving. There is a specific quality of stillness that is different from simply not moving. It is the stillness of a body that has received information it is not yet ready to process and has paused all non-essential functions while it decides what to do with it. I stood in the corridor in that particular stillness for what was probably 4 seconds and felt like considerably longer. Then I moved to where I could see the doorway. The bedroom door was not fully closed. The amber light inside it was warm and certain and indifferent to what it was illuminating. I did not push the door open. I did not need to. What I could see through the gap was enough, more than enough, to assemble the complete picture from the partial one. The way 2 silhouettes occupy a space together when there is no performance in it, when they have forgotten or stopped caring that the world outside the room still exists. I stood there for a long moment. I want to tell you that what I felt was rage. Rage would have been clean. Rage would have been simple and loud and would have given me somewhere to put the energy that was moving through me in that moment. But what I actually felt was quieter and more devastating than rage. It was the specific sensation of something you had been constructing for a long time becoming, very suddenly, a different shape than you thought it was. Not destroyed, restructured. Everything still present, but none of it meaning what it meant before. I stepped back from the doorway. I turned around. Rosie was standing in the hallway behind me. She was holding a folded towel against her chest with both hands. Her expression was calm, composed, the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and has just watched it arrive. She did not look surprised, not even slightly. I stood in that doorway for what felt like a long time. It was probably 4 seconds, maybe 5, the kind of interval that does not register in ordinary moments, but in moments like this one expands to contain everything. Every assumption you have been operating on, every version of your life you believed you were living, every carefully constructed piece of the architecture you spent years building inside the walls of a place you called home. 4 seconds. And then I stepped back. I did not make a sound. I want to be precise about this because the silence of that moment was not incidental. It was the most deliberate thing I have ever done. I have walked into situations that most people would not survive, and I have done it without hesitation and without visible reaction because the first thing this world teaches you, if you intend to last in it, is that your face is information. Whatever your face does in a difficult moment is a signal to everyone present about what you are going to do next. So I stepped back from the doorway, and I kept my face still and I turned. Rosie was already in the hallway. She was standing approximately 4 feet behind me holding a folded towel against her chest with both hands, the ordinary posture of someone who had been moving through the apartment on a routine task and had simply stopped. She was looking at me. Not at the doorway I had just stepped back from, not at the room beyond it, at me, directly, with the calm, steady attention of someone who was not surprised by anything that was currently happening. That was the thing. That was the detail that rearranged everything in a single instant. She was not startled. She was not caught in the wrong place at the wrong moment with the anxious expression of an employee who had accidentally witnessed something she was not supposed to. There was no performance of not knowing. There was no careful adjustment of her gaze to suggest she had seen nothing. She simply looked at me with those calm, dark eyes, and in them was an expression I had never seen directed at me from anyone in my professional life or my personal one. She already knew. Not tonight, not from the hallway, from before, from long before. From however many weeks or months she had been moving through this apartment in her white apron and her quiet shoes accumulating everything while the people around her forgot that accumulation was happening. She knew. And she had been waiting. For what exactly I could not have told you in that moment. I did not have the language for it yet. I was standing in the hallway of my own penthouse at 11:40 at night, with the city laid out 47 floors below me, and the specific silence of a man whose world had just restructured itself pressing in from every direction. And the only stable thing in the entire frame was a 25-year-old woman in a maid's uniform looking at me like she had been expecting me to arrive at this exact moment and had simply been patient enough to wait. We did not speak. There was a question sitting between us in that dark hallway, enormous and precise, and not yet ready to be asked out loud. I was not ready, not because I was afraid of the answer, because I understood instinctively that the answer was not a simple thing and that the hallway was not the right place for it. I looked at her. She looked at me. And something passed between us that did not require words, the particular understanding of two people who have both been carrying something heavy and have just, for the first time, acknowledged the weight to each other. I walked toward the kitchen. She followed. They left an hour after I walked away from that doorway. I did not ask them to leave. I did not need to. There is a particular atmosphere that fills a space when the most dangerous person in it has become very still and very quiet, and everyone present understands instinctively that the ordinary rules of the moment no longer apply. Jade knew what my stillness meant. Whatever else she had miscalculated about me, she had learned that much correctly. She gathered Jung with the efficient urgency of someone who understood that the window for an uncomplicated exit was narrow and closing. The front door closed at 11:14. I stood at the kitchen window and watched the city below and did not move until I heard the elevator finish its descent. Then I sat down at the kitchen table. I want to explain why I did not go to my phone, why I did not call the two men I would have called in any other version of a crisis. The honest answer is that something had shifted in the architecture of my trust in a way I had not yet fully mapped, and until I understood the new layout, I did not know who was standing on solid ground and who was not. The affair had been happening inside my home, inside the perimeter of everything I thought I controlled, which meant that either the people I paid to know things had not known this particular thing, or they had known and had made a decision about whether to tell me. Either answer was a problem. Rosie came into the kitchen 10 minutes after I sat down. She did not ask if I wanted anything. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove and took 2 cups from the cabinet with the quiet efficiency of someone performing a task they have done 1,000 times. And then she sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table and waited. I looked at her for a moment. Then I told her what I had seen. Not because I needed her to confirm it, not because some part of me was still hoping the picture could be reassembled into something other than what it was. I told her because she was the only person in my life in that moment who I was completely certain had no agenda that required me to receive information in a particular way. Everyone else I might have called had something at stake in my reaction. Rosie had nothing at stake except the truth. And the truth was what I needed more than anything else I could have reached for. She listened without interrupting, without the performed sympathy that people deploy when they are deciding how to manage you rather than actually hearing you. She just listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, there is more that you need to know, and it is worse than what you saw tonight. She did not reach for the words carefully. She did not soften the approach. She simply began. She told me about the conversations in the hallway, the questions about my Tuesday schedule, the route, the security rotation. She told me about the phone call she had overheard in the guest bathroom, the one that was not in English, the one with the timeline, the one with my name at the center of it. She laid it out piece by piece, with the particular precision of someone who had been organizing this information for weeks against the specific possibility of this conversation. By the time she finished, the tea had gone cold. I had not touched mine. I sat across from a 26-year-old woman in a white apron and understood, with the complete and irreversible clarity of a man who has spent his life reading rooms, that she had just saved my life. She started with the schedule. Not because it was the beginning chronologically, but because it was the clearest entry point into the pattern, the piece that was most legible, most demonstrable, most resistant to being explained away as coincidence or misinterpretation. She had learned, in 11 weeks of carrying this alone, exactly how to present what she knew so that it could not be dismissed. She told me about the Tuesday conversation in the hallway, the specific questions, the specific answers, the route, the timing, the consistency of the driver on certain evenings. She told me the date it happened and the approximate time, and where she had been standing, and what she had been doing, and why she had been close enough to hear it without being visible. She was precise about all of it in the way that a person is precise when they have been rehearsing the delivery of information against the possibility of exactly this conversation. I listened without interrupting. She moved forward chronologically. The second set of questions 3 weeks later, different in their focus, narrower, more specific, no longer about general patterns but about particular evenings. The two men who traveled with me on certain nights when the formal security rotation was reduced, whether they were consistent or whether they changed. Jade had answered that too, easily, without understanding that the question was not personal curiosity. Then Rosie told me about the phone call. She described it carefully, where she had been, how close she was to the bathroom door, what language the first portion of it was in. She told me she had understood enough of it to identify the register even when she could not translate every word. The register of logistics, of confirmation, of a timeline being reviewed against a set of conditions that were almost fully met. She told me she had heard my name twice in that phone call. I sat very still while she said this. She told me about the pattern she had assembled from those pieces, the progressive narrowing of the information Jung was collecting, moving from general access to specific access to operational detail, in a sequence that only made sense if you understood what the sequence was building toward. An affair does not require knowing which two men travel with a man on low-security evenings. A business negotiation does not require the precise timing of a private route. Only one objective required all of it together. She said this plainly and without theatrical weight. She did not need to add weight to it. The information carried its own. Jung had never been interested in Jade. He had been interested in proximity to me. Jade was the architecture of that proximity, a woman already inside the perimeter, already trusted, already present in the spaces where my private schedule was visible and discussable. He had offered her something real enough to secure her cooperation and specific enough to ensure her usefulness. The modeling career was genuine. The contract was real. What she was exchanging for it she had understood as an affair, and some information shared in unguarded moments. What she was actually exchanging for it was a blueprint. And the blueprint was weeks from being used. Rosie finished speaking and folded her hands on the table and looked at me steadily. The kitchen was completely silent. I sat with the full shape of it for a long moment, the complete picture assembled from all the pieces, every earlier scene now reframed, the entire architecture of the past months restructuring itself around the thing that had been at its center the whole time. Then I understood something else. If Rosie had not been in that hallway on that Tuesday, if she had been anywhere else in the apartment at that precise moment, I would not be sitting in this kitchen. I would simply be gone. I asked her the next morning. Not that night. That night I had too much to process and too many decisions to begin arranging in the correct order, and not enough of the stillness required to ask a question and actually hear the answer. But the next morning, early, before the apartment had shifted from night quiet to day quiet, I came back to the kitchen and Rosie was already there, and I sat down across from her, and I asked her directly, "Why did you wait?" She looked at me for a moment in the way she had, that particular quality of attention that did not perform itself, that simply landed and stayed. Then she answered. She said she had considered telling me in the 5th week. That was the week she understood it was no longer simply an affair. The week the questions shifted from personal to operational, and she recognized the shape of what Jung was actually building. She had stood in the service room that evening and turned the decision over for a long time, and arrived at the conclusion that telling me then would have been the most dangerous thing she could have done. Not for her, for me. She explained it simply. A man like Jung does not build a plan of that complexity without building contingencies into it. If the plan surfaced too early, if I moved before the full shape of it was visible and demonstrable, he would know it had been compromised. He would adjust. He would accelerate. Or he would step back entirely, wait, and return in a form that nobody recognized because it did not resemble the first attempt. Speaking too early was not caution. It was the fastest available route to ensuring the danger survived the warning. So she waited. She waited and she kept building the picture. Not passively, she was precise about this distinction, and I want to be precise about it here too. She was not simply absorbing information that happened to come her way. She was making decisions about where to be and when, which rooms to move through slowly, which tasks to perform near which doors. She was not a bystander who witnessed something. She was the only person in that penthouse, actively working the problem from the inside while everyone else was either conducting the threat or unaware of it. She needed enough to be believed. That was the second reason. She understood, and this understanding required her to know something real about me, something she had assembled from months of careful observation, that I did not act on incomplete information. I acted on certainty. Presenting me with a suspicion would have produced a specific and predictable response that would have achieved the same result as speaking too early. She needed the full picture. She needed the timeline. She needed the phone call and the schedule questions and the pattern of access that demonstrated beyond interpretation that the affair was a vehicle and not a destination. And she needed the right moment. The right moment was not a date she had calculated in advance. It was a condition. It was the moment when the information was complete enough to be conclusive, and the timing was such that my response could move faster than Jung's contingency. That moment was the night I came home early. She had not arranged that, but she had been ready for it. I sat across from her in the early morning kitchen, and I thought about the people I paid specifically to protect me. The men with the particular training and the significant compensation and the years of demonstrated loyalty. None of them had been working this problem. She had, alone in a white apron, for 11 weeks. I did not have a response that felt adequate to that. I am not sure one exists. I called Jade back to the penthouse on the third day. Not the night it happened, not the morning after. I waited because I needed the conversation to happen on my terms rather than in the emotional aftermath of discovery, which is when people say the things that feel true in the moment but are not necessarily the things that matter. I had spent 3 days learning everything Rosie knew and arranging it into a complete picture, and I wanted to sit across from Jade with the full shape of it already in my possession before she said a single word. She arrived looking composed, carefully so, the particular composure of someone who has spent 3 days preparing for a conversation they know is coming and has decided in advance how much to give and how much to hold. I let her sit down. Then I told her what I knew. Not as an accusation, not with the raised voice and the broken objects that she had perhaps expected or prepared for. I laid it out the way I would lay out any piece of information that required a response, clearly, sequentially, without decoration. The affair, the questions about my schedule, the access she had provided, the phone call Rosie had overheard in the guest bathroom, the timeline that Jung had been building around the information she handed him across weeks of conversations she believed were private. I watched her face move through several versions of itself while I spoke. The composed version lasted until I mentioned the schedule. The prepared version lasted until I mentioned the phone call. By the time I finished, she was sitting very still in the way that people sit when the architecture of a position they have been holding has been removed from underneath them, and they have not yet decided what to do with the fact of the floor. She admitted the affair without much resistance. I think she had always known that particular conversation was eventual, that the question was never whether but when. She admitted the modeling arrangement, the offer Jung had made, and the calculation she had performed, and the conclusion she had reached that the opportunity was real and worth what it required her to do to obtain it. She said she had told herself it was not personal. I did not respond to that. Then I told her the part she did not know. I told her what Rosie had understood from the phone call, the part that was not about the affair, the part that was not about access or schedules or security patterns as ends in themselves, but as means to something else entirely. The part where Jade was not the point of the plan but the instrument of it, a tool selected for its proximity to the target and its willingness to be useful in exchange for something it wanted. I watched her understand it. The moment it landed was quiet and complete. She did not cry immediately. She sat with it for a long moment in the particular silence of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about a situation and arriving at a total that is nothing like the one they expected. Then she said, and her voice was very small when she said it, that she had not known that part. I believed her. Not because it changed what she had done. It did not change what she had done, but because the specific quality of her shock was not the shock of exposure. It was the shock of someone who had believed they were using a situation and had just understood they were the situation. Jung had looked at Jade and seen the same thing Jade had looked at me and seen. A vehicle. She had not been a partner in what he was building. She had been a door. I want to be careful about how much I tell you here. Not because I am protecting myself. At this point in the story, there is very little left to protect in that sense, but because the details are not what matter. The details are the mechanism, and the mechanism is not the story. The story is what the mechanism revealed about the distance between what people believe power looks like and what it actually is. What I will tell you is this. I spent 4 days after that kitchen conversation appearing to know nothing. This required a specific discipline that I had spent 11 years developing and had never needed more than I needed it in those 4 days. I moved through my schedule with the ordinary precision of a man who has processed a personal betrayal and is managing it privately in the way that men of my particular world are expected to manage such things. I attended the meetings I was supposed to attend. I made the calls that were expected. I was seen in the right places at the right times by the right people. Jung saw what I needed him to see. A man who had discovered his wife's affair and was doing what powerful men do when their pride has been damaged, absorbing it quietly, moving forward, maintaining the appearance of control while the personal wreckage settled somewhere behind the professional facade. He believed this because he had made the same assumption about me that every person makes when they have spent enough time in rooms where they were the smartest person present. He assumed that his understanding of my capabilities was complete. He had studied my schedule, my routes, my security patterns. He had built a plan around a version of me that was real but not total. He did not know about Rosie. Nobody knew about Rosie. That was the operational advantage she had handed me without either of us using that language to describe it. The information she carried had not traveled through any of the channels that a man planning what Jung was planning would have thought to monitor. It had moved through the quietest possible route, a young woman in a service uniform carrying it entirely inside herself, until she placed it directly in my hands. By the time Jung understood that the situation had changed, it was no longer a situation he had any capacity to change back. I will not describe the specifics of what followed. What I will tell you is that the 3 governments who spent years attempting to dismantle what I built never succeeded because they were always working from the outside. They understood the visible architecture, the registered entities, the names on the documents. They did not understand the internal logic of an organization that had survived as long as mine had survived, which is that the real protection is never the outermost layer. It is the thing at the center that nobody thought to look at because it did not look like protection. Rosie did not watch what happened directly. She was not in those rooms and I did not put her there. But she was present in the apartment during those 4 days, and she was paying attention in the way she always paid attention, quietly, completely, from a position that nobody remembered to account for. She told me later that she understood the shape of it from the changes in the apartment's atmosphere, the specific quality of calm that settles over a situation that has been resolved rather than one that is simply waiting. She recognized it because she had helped build it. She folded towels and replaced flowers and moved through the penthouse in her white apron and said nothing to anyone. She had always been the best person in that building at knowing when silence was the right response. I did not give her money. I want to be clear about that because It would have been the easiest thing and the most obvious thing, and in almost any other version of this situation, it would have been the appropriate thing. A significant sum. A letter of reference that would have opened any door in the city. The clean transactional resolution of an obligation that most people in my position would have considered more than adequately discharged by a number with enough zeros behind it. I considered it. For about 4 minutes on the morning after the kitchen confession, I considered it seriously. Then I understood that offering Rosie money for what she had done was a way of putting it back into a category I could manage. The category of services rendered and compensated, of professional relationships with clear boundaries and clean conclusions. It was a way of making what she had done smaller so that what I owed her could be made countable. What she had done was not countable. So I did not offer her money. What I did instead was something that cost me considerably more than money would have. Something that required me to put down the tools I had been using to navigate every relationship in my life for the past 11 years. I spoke to her honestly. Not about the situation. Not about Jung or Jade or the operational details of what had been resolved. I mean something more fundamental than that. I mean that I sat across from her at the kitchen table on a quiet Thursday morning, and I spoke to her the way you speak to someone when you have stopped performing the version of yourself that the room usually requires and are simply present as yourself instead. I told her what I had understood from what she did. I told her that she had seen me, not the empire, not the name, not the fear that traveled ahead of me into every room, but the actual person underneath all of that architecture, and that she had made decisions to protect that person at a significant personal cost and with no guarantee of any outcome that served her own interests. I told her that in 32 years of building something that required me to assess the loyalty of everyone around me, I had never encountered that quality in its pure form. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without filling the space before I had finished. Then she said something that I have returned to many times since. She said she had not protected me because of what I was. She had protected me because of what she had seen when the performance dropped. In the early mornings before the apartment woke up. In the moments between one version of himself and the next when a person does not yet know they are being observed. She said that the man she had seen in those unguarded moments was worth the 11 weeks. I did not know what to do with that. I am not sure I have ever known what to do with being seen without it costing me something. That is the thing power does over enough time. It makes genuine recognition feel dangerous, because you have spent so long using the gap between what people see and what is true as a form of protection. Rosie closed that gap simply by telling me she had already looked through it. The conversation lasted about 40 minutes. It was the first real conversation I had conducted in that penthouse since the day I moved in. Afterward, she stood up, refilled both cups without being asked, and went back to work. And something in the apartment shifted permanently into a different shape. The penthouse is quieter now. Not the quiet it was before. That particular silence had weight to it. The compressed weight of a space where two people were performing a life rather than living one. Every room carried that quality, the careful arrangement of objects, the conversation that covered the surface of things without touching what was underneath, the acoustic of a home that functions as a stage set for something that is not quite real. That quiet is gone. What replaced it took me several weeks to identify correctly because I had not experienced it in long enough that I had lost the vocabulary for it. What the penthouse has now is simply the honest silence of a space that is not pretending to be anything other than what it is. No performance underneath the surface of ordinary moments. No loaded pauses standing in for conversations that were never going to happen. Just rooms. Just morning light moving across marble floors. Just the city below going about its business without asking anything from me. Jade has been gone for 3 weeks. She left with the specific efficiency of a woman who understood there was nothing left in the arrangement worth prolonging. She took what was hers. The door closed behind her without theater, and the apartment absorbed her absence faster than I expected, which told me something I had already begun to suspect about what her presence had actually been made of. I noticed the empty spaces in the wardrobe for approximately 2 days. After that, the rooms simply became themselves again. I have thought carefully about what I feel about that. The honest answer is less than I would have predicted when I believed the marriage was something other than what it was. Grief requires losing something real. What I lost was an idea. The idea I had permitted myself to hold for 14 months, that warmth was available to me if I simply stopped looking too closely at its architecture. That idea is gone. In its place is something I did not expect and do not have a clean word for. Something that feels, cautiously and without performance, like clarity. Rosie is still here. She is in the kitchen when I come downstairs in the early morning before the city has fully committed to being awake. She makes coffee the way I take it without being asked, because she has been observing the details of my life for long enough that the information is simply part of her. She moves through the apartment with the same quiet efficiency she always had, and also now with something additional that was not there before. The ease of a person who has stopped wondering whether the space they occupy is one they are permitted to be in. She chose to stay. I asked her once why, and she gave me an answer that I have not stopped thinking about. She said that she had come to this apartment knowing nothing and had learned everything by watching carefully, and that what she had learned about the city, about the people in it, about herself in relation to all of it, was worth more than any other education she could have found. She said she was not finished learning yet. I understood that she was not talking about the apartment. I am 32 years old. I have built something that has outlasted 3 government investigations and 1 assassination attempt, and 1 marriage that I entered willingly and should have examined more carefully. And I am sitting in my kitchen in the early morning, with the city spread below the windows and a woman across the table who knows exactly who I am underneath everything I have constructed. She is not afraid of what she knows. She did not need me to be more than I was. For the first time in longer than I can accurately measure, that is not a vulnerability. It is the only thing in this penthouse that feels completely real.